This is not a new question, right? Like, if you go back to, like, say, 1993, we have this concept of a eternal September, right? Typically, like, what used to happen is, every time, I think, people in the fall, or any new batch used to join the academia, or like, any of the colleges would have a slew of new students who would get access to the internet and hence Usenet. And I don't know. And I was talking to somebody the other day, right? Like, I have been, like, working R&D for like more than 2 decades. And prior Avatar, for example, I work in ad networks and content delivery networks. And uh, you also had like research papers come out, how to do better delivery, do better ad generation, do like better recommendation systems, avionics system, right, in defense, which has, I don't know, maybe like uh, a lifetime of, I would say, like, say 30 years, 20 to 30 years, or at least 20 years, if not say 30 years. That AI can have a huge impact on simulations and testing. And I'll give real world examples of this protein folding, drug discovery, and people have shown that it can have huge impact there.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pragmatic AI, a podcast where we dive deep into the real stories from AI trenches, speaking with luminaries from the global AI ecosystem. You might be wondering why another AI podcast. Our goal is simple to bring authenticity to AI conversations and cut through the hype. Each episode will feature industry leaders, from founders to VCs to AI leaders to academics. These are people who have been building AI systems for the last 10, 15, 20 years. These are people who have seen through multiple AI hype cycles. I'm your host, Anuj Gupta. I'm a seasoned AI executive with more than 20 years of experience of working in core AI. I have incubated large AI teams across geographies. I now work as on-demand head of AI, helping clients adopt AI faster and drive ROI from their AI efforts. Recently, we helped a YC company build a bunch of critical AI systems, demoed to none other than Sam Altman and Vinod Khosla, securing Series B from Khosla Ventures for this startup. I've also co-authored a major book in AI. The book gives a point of view of how do you do AI when you're part of industry and startups, as opposed to research labs and academia. The book has been endorsed by top leaders coming from Carnegie Mellon, UCSG, DeepMind, Google AI, and many more. Join us as we explore the pragmatic side of AI, where the real stories are told. Hi, today our guest is Vinayak Hegde. Vinayak is a seasoned tech leader with 20 years of experience in product development and software architecture, specializing in IoT, embedded system, large-scale networks, data processing, and AI ML. He has led global teams across edtech, developer tools, CDNs, analytics, IoT, e-commerce, and logistics. From founding startups to scaling teams from 0 to 100, Vinayak has been instrumental at every growth stage. He has been part of Spedera, acquired by Akamai, helped set up Akamai India, contributed to earlier teams in Mobi, and served as CTO at Zoomcar. He is also an active advisor and investor in deep tech startups. You can find more about Vinayak on his LinkedIn. Hey, hi Vinayak, how have you been?
Hi, Anuj, I'm been good. Great to talk to you again.
Same here, Vinayak. Tell me what's up? What are you working on these days?
These days, I'm working as a principal AI advocate at Microsoft. I work with startups, enterprises, and students, and helping them kind of adopt the latest in AI. So I build like code samples, write blog posts, work with customers as well to kind of solve some of their very specific problems related to building AI systems internally as well. And also, like, because I interact with customers a lot, of all kinds, right, whether students, enterprises, or startups. I get a lot of feedback about our products in Microsoft. So I take that and work with the product teams across the spectrum to kind of incorporate that feedback about what's happening in the field, because the uh, world of AI is changing really fast, whether it's implementation, whether it is tooling. So everybody is kind of trying to make sense of how to build best products and how to incorporate these technologies into their products, and kind of acting as an interface between some of the product teams and also kind of helping customers adopt. So it's like a both inward and outward looking kind of role, very very unique in that sense. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. So then you are surely the right person to talk on AI, latest trend, what's going, what's not going. Uh, what are some of your favorite AI tools you have been using these days? And what do you love about them?
Yeah, so again, like there are different tools that I use for different things. There's obviously like ChatGPT and Claude, and I use them uh, in a variety of different modes. I'll talk about that. So that's there, because I also, as I said, like I do a lot of writing. Of concepts of learnings on the field in a way that people can understand. So communication is like big part of my job, whether it's presentations, maybe this broadcast is also another way of reaching people. So I think how to kind of organize my thinking. I use some of these tools. At the same time, I also write code, so I use GitHub Copilot and use it to kind of figure out what is the best way to build like code samples, so that people can maybe use that as a starting point for their own production, right? So the point is not only like building like cool demos, which is kind of nice to kind of demonstrate that, but also provide a starting point for people so that they don't have to kind of start from scratch and use like the example to incorporate more and more of their own context of their own use cases, and then kind of build upon that. So most of these code samples are like again like open source, so that provide as a starting point. So again, like I use it for communications and writing, and kind of structuring my thoughts. At the same time, I also use it for writing code and understand, actually not just writing code, it's like understanding code, writing test cases. So there is like pre-existing code. Sometimes I may not be kind of aware of it, so sometimes I ask it to explain. Yeah, and then also I think it's useful in like building best practices, like writing tests as well. Generally, when I work with AI tools, I think I work in two modes. One is, I would say, explore, and this kind of if you look at the if I to get technical and talk about temperature, for example, on one end of the spectrum, you want it like AI to be very creative, and the other part you want to kind of just kind of execute or generate given like specific set of instructions. I actually also work at both ends of spectrums. Like I use it like sometimes for ideation, and or if I have I have certain things in mind, and I want to kind of extend that, maybe analogy, set of bullet points that I want to kind of do and say, hey, these are the kind of few examples, what more can be done, and pick up what is like the best. So use it as an ideation tool and curate and work with it in an explore mode. At the same time, in the generate mode, you treat it as a collaborator, right? And as a sparring partner, right? So you use it like, if you, for example, if I've written like say a book review or small article, and I want to improve, I say, okay, it doesn't quite um, I probably might be like beating around the bush a little bit, or saying the things in the roundabout way, or maybe sometimes there are like acronyms which are very specific, like MCP, LLMs. I wanted to write for a semi-technical or a non-technical audience, so I'll kind of adopt that, ask AI to adopt that person, and say, hey, can I say this in a better way, and see if it does a good job, and continue to prompt and get it to a point where I feel okay, it has not lost meaning,
Yeah,
which is, but at the same time, it has written it in a better language. So that constant refining, sometimes I use it for that. And obviously, it requires oversight and curation, right? Because sometimes I do notice that it loses meaning or does not get the nuances, and you kind of have to keep on re-editing it. So you can just blindly copy it as a low effort thing, which is also a problem sometimes about how people use tools, and especially the newer people, right? Like if they, for example, if you want to write a, I've seen on resumes, for example, people want to write a description of product, and they'll just put one-liner prompt in the whatever chat GPT, and then they would maybe generate whatever the first thing comes out, and it may not be the best thing, right? And if you have like worked with enough tools, it's kind of it's very possible to figure out if it has been generated by AI. Again, it's not 100% there, but you can kind of get a sense of, because of the language as well. So you want to have an authentic voice. You want to make the points that you want to make, but you can use it to kind of improve your writing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
similarly in code as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. Any particular deep insight that you have developed in terms of using tool usage, purely from a usage point of view, that you would recommend? Oh, I believe this is how people can get more out of tools.
Yeah, I think I feel that I have become a better prompter as I've explored tools. Like it's very simple things, right? Which are kind of obvious. Like for example, being polite, asking it to maybe avoid certain words. For
Hmm.
example, instead of leveraging, say using, instead of engaging, say something else. So there are certain words which are like the AI uses are very, I would say, flowery, or we typically don't use very regularly in our language. So having like, I wouldn't say stop words, but having those kind of filtered out, that helps. Um, there are like different techniques also to improve. For example, be clear in what is you want the AI tool to do. Be
Hmm.
polite. Uh, be clear about the intent and the tone. And
Hmm.
if you give this as a prompt, three or four things very well, and ask it to adopt a persona, actually it does a fairly good job. You might, and just be sure that you don't be afraid to kind of regenerate things again if you're
Yeah,
not happy, because most people just take, whatever is the first output and just like maybe paste it. So don't do that low effort thing. Learn how to use a tool, do better prompting.
Hmm.
So as I said, like, make sure that your voice comes through. So I think better prompting is probably one way to kind of do so, to communicate, just as you would communicate with another human, like I'm communicating with you. If you're just as you treat AI as another maybe sparring partner or the co-pilot, that is like the common word that I use to do that. That works really well. And again, that's whatever style you have will develop over a period of time,
Yeah,
uh, so that doesn't sound very mechanical or very flowery, and that tuning actually helps. So I feel that uh, that is a useful insight to kind of develop your kind of own voice or persona kind of thing.
got it, got it. And that's a, I think you have already said it in a great way, right? It's important to be authentic in the core ideas while use these tools to kind of represent it better, right?
Hmm.
And that actually brings me to the next question, there, right? So a lot of platforms that we have seen in our journey, Vinayak, right? We Stack Overflows, the Quoras, the Reddits of the world. These are essentially forums where people express their opinion depending on their expertise. People help each other. Now, one of the things that GenAI has done is that, in a way, the entry barrier to these platforms has been brought down. Anybody can use a lot of these tools and can also seem to be fairly expert enough and voice their opinion and stuff like that, right? One, what do you see as the future of these platforms? Because in a way, what I'm trying to get to is earlier, a lot of us would have very different point of views because we had different experiences. So the conversations will not be around average. It will be far away from average. But now a lot of content by a lot of people looks very similar, hence it is around average. Do you think platforms like this are going to lose their value proposition over a period of time?
I think
And
human authenticity will actually rise in value. Human curation also will rise in value. We are seeing the probably early stages of that as well. So again, like I said, like communication, it can, so there is like a base effect, right? Earlier, if I could not say communicate very well in English, I could possibly express a mishmash of things and ask it to rewrite it. So the base has lifted, right? So anybody can, for example, if I'm doing this interview by text, I have some thoughts not maybe well formed. I can put this in ChatGPT, add up prompt and say, hey, these are my thoughts, can you put it in a way that is concise? No, that is an example of a prompt, and it will do a
yeah,
better. So the base has been kind of lifted, but again, like, it's important that that authenticity is not kind of lost. So while I feel that the Reddit and Quora, I think the point was that diversity of views will also is also a lot. Whereas it is possible due to the auto-regressive nature of AI that it might converge to some things. But I feel that if you are like a poster on like Reddit, if you are writing replies, or even let's take a platform that all of us use like X, right? And we all know that there are bots, and you can
yeah,
see low effort replies from some of the bots that are either shilling for something, or they adopt a persona saying that I'm going to oppose XYZ political party or XYZ thought process.
mm,
Uh, Whether it is like, it could be technology like crypto, it could be a technology like AI, or it could
mm,
be like a country like maybe India, 414. And you can, if you read through this enough, I think the human mind is has enough pattern matching. You can actually see through the low effort kind of system, right? So human curation will become important. So maybe things like Substack, and I think you and me probably also subscribe to podcasts and all of these other things, and we are also on a podcast since we are talking about this. I think that will become more important. So human voices will be there, but the challenge, I think, on the other end of the spectrum, like, one is AI, right, which can
mm,
be kind of converged, but the other end of the spectrum is, especially in an online format, social media. I think if your views are a little more extreme, then I think you can get a lot more traction, right? So I feel that uh, I don't know whether they will cancel each other out, but you don't know where it will kind of go. Because on one side, if you want to kind of get views on social media, I can express like like really extreme thoughts which I may or may not believe in, and hence
yeah,
I can get more views. But if I use like AI, then it is trying to probably going to be like more generic and more polite typically, right? Because of the way we have our safety systems also implemented in our someone's AI. So you
yeah,
will have to, so I don't know, maybe human speech might become more extreme, but like AI, if it is generated, might be more moderate. Or
mm,
even again, like AI also can be made more, possibly more extreme by using prompting and training and all these other techniques. So it's hard to say, but I generally feel that human curation and authenticity will stand out a lot. In-person meetings will become more kind of important.
mm,
So especially because even the avatars also nowadays can you can train your avatars based on your own maybe behavior or writings or communications to act like you, and they can generate a version of you. And we've seen some early demos of that.
Yeah.
See, and again, this has again implications on misinformation and other things. So yeah, we'll have to come with some again, like the jury is kind of out on this, but we'll have to come up with some system to
Mm.
figure out the authenticity of some stuff. And also, I think if we have seen this even in social media, that authentic voices are the ones that typically stand out and not like the generic ones. So I think there is somewhat of a self-moderating system there, because people are also kind of figuring out how to use technology. And then if it becomes very pervasive, then the general value goes down, right? Just like economics, the supply of something increases, uh, then the demand also will kind of get suppressed. So
Yeah. Interesting.
standing under the crowd, I think human curation and authenticity will matter a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I was thinking of this particular option, right? I mean, one thing that is really obvious is that the number of interactions, the number of posts, all of that will go up, which is great for a platform, right? But then what about the uniqueness aspect of it, right? Because that is the qualitative side of things, right? And it looks like two seems to be at that odd. But that leads to a larger question, which I think in a way you have already asked, right? What happens to the internet in general, right? We all have relied, especially back then when we were growing up, right? As kids, we saw internet. Here is this infinite library we all have access to. You can go find anything. And usually back in our days, right? I mean, most information that you will come across is fairly accurate, right? But with Gen AI, do you think the accuracy part, the reliability part of information, and not just on these platforms, but internet in general, right? That is likely to go down.
It's hard to say because see, I mean, this is not a new question, right? Like, if you go back to, like, say 1993, we have this concept of a eternal September, right? Typically, like, what used to happen is every time I think people in the fall or any new batch used to join the academia or like any of the colleges would have a slew of new students who would get access to the internet and hence Usenet. And I don't know if there are enough people who even remember Usenet now, but it was like a communication mechanism where like you could post to groups and there were special interest groups you could do. So think of it as a precursor to Reddit, I think, or Quora. That is probably the closest I can think of. And then you had all of this influx of people, right, who didn't know how to ask questions or even search,
Hmm.
and would have the quality of discourse going down. And people said, no, the internet is going to the dogs. And to some extent, that has happened, right? I think Cory Doctorow has written this excellent tweet storm, and also I think he's written a book where it uses the word enshittification of platforms, and I think to some extent that has happened. But also I think a lot of internet is not easily available, right? For example, look at research reports that are behind paywalls. A lot of the content that is behind paywalls, and that will still have a higher value. Marketing communications, yeah, I think some of that will get affected, and hence
Hmm.
people will have to figure out how to work that angle, use community, use better communication, how do you stand out from the crowd. So those questions have to be answered. But if it like spammy content, I think spammy content has been on the internet forever. It's not like a new problem. Technology
Hmm.
will to some extent will amplify it, but just as we had like with emails spam, right? Like today, many of us don't even look at the spam folder because it has become so good that we
Yeah.
can just say select all and delete for the most time, or we can just scan it once and just delete it, right? Similarly, I think people will become better at that. And if there are sites that are like becoming very spammy, people will add them to block lists, or they won't be higher rank in the indexes. So all of those things will kind of come into the picture to overcome this problem. And it's not as a new problem. We had email spam issues, we have web spam issues. We always had, like, for example, conspiracy sites. So again, like, it's not as if, like, conspiracy sites is like something new.
Hmm.
uh, I think there are, like, problematic sites like 4chan also that have been around forever. So you will have
Yeah.
those problems. I think technology will kind of amplify them, but we'll kind of figure out ways to curate that content, because again, this is not as if it's a new problem. Technology will amplify it, but also technology can also act as better at filtering, right, as we have seen as well.
Interesting. Very interesting. Maybe changing gears, Vinayak. Uh, you work a lot with clients of different shapes and sizes, early stage startups as well as large organizations. Uh, One of the things that one keeps hearing about is that the adoption of AI is slower as opposed to the rate at which the changes are coming in, right?
Absolutely.
In your opinion, from your point of view, why do you think that's the case, and what could be some of the ways to kind of accelerate that?
That This is an excellent question, right? I think, and I was talking to somebody the other day, right? Like, I have been like working R&D for like more than 2 decades, and prior avatar, for example, I work in ad networks and content delivery networks, and you also had like research papers come out, how to do better delivery, do better ad generation, do like better recommendation systems,
Yeah.
improve the quality of streaming, so on and so forth, right? And something would kind of get published in research, and by the time it comes to production, it would take a lesser amount of time. It would take about 2 to 3 years. But what has
mm,
happened with like AIs, and there are like famous conferences like New Rips, for example, right? Paper is published there, and then people just figure out how to implement it. Typically, sometimes the papers themselves are accompanied by an implementation which people can
yeah,
use for reproducibility. But again, reproducibility is a large enough topic. Maybe we can tackle at some other
yeah,
point. But let's assume that most of the papers are like reproducible. So it is possible to incorporate someone's technology really fast. So that delta of 2 to 3 years has come down to 3 to 6 months, which is insane
yeah,
for any engineer like you and me, right? Because the technology is changing so fast. So while the technology itself is changing so fast, I think what organizations also struggling to some extent is how do you absorb that technology, right? Because AI is, let me first talk about it from a say technology point of view, right? We've always had new technology. We had mobile, we had cloud, we had multimedia,
yeah,
so many different things we had, like crypto, for example. Um, but they were all deterministic, right? We always had a deterministic components. And if we give, or if we knew that A plus B plus C is equal to D, every time I do A plus B plus C, I will get D. But that
yeah,
is not true with any kind of probability system. So for the first time, or rather the first time at a mass level, I would say, because it's not that probability systems
yeah,
existed before, but at a mass adoption scale, we've never had a component in our engineering system where every time you could give an output. So now people are figuring out, okay, if I use this, what is the implication of it on my customers, on my business, on my internal workflows? And
mm,
that is like so it's not enough to build a system and deploy it, but it's also important to be able to monitor it for accuracy,
mm,
change usages over a period of time, right? So that means the way, coming back to the second problem, this is one part is the technology, right? How do you do continuous improvement, continuous deployment, observability? The other end of the spectrum is how do I measure this, right? Because I'll give a simple example. I have built maybe let's say a SaaS tool that maybe
mm,
does summarization of, or intent of. So basically, let's say you give it an audience profile and you give it like list of things that you want to generate
mm,
idea, and it generates a copy for you. Now, maybe most of the time your customers are like say SMEs, and they're using it in that tool in a certain way. Now suddenly you sign on a large customer who is like
mm,
taking like maybe entire PDFs of communication guidelines, of brand guidelines, all of that, and posting that as prompt. Now the usage of the tool has completely changed outside of your control, right? Because you
yeah,
have no control about what input the customer is giving, right? And what input is getting kind of generated. So you have this component which is probabilistic, and then somebody kind of feeds in a initially small prompts, and then a
yeah,
larger prompt, and so they don't, the customer doesn't know that they cannot do this, right? So now your system is changing on the fly, but what does it do to your relevance metrics? What does it do to your
mm,
capacity planning? What does it do to say your internal system that index maybe some of these docs, right? Because they might be referenced at some point later, see, to kind of go and figure out provenance of how this message was generated.
yeah,
Uh, and all of these problems are kind of, some of them are like already there. For example, capacity always is an issue, but some of these problems are like new. So just to take one angle, say let's say for example take observability. They've deployed it, so looking at all the technical metrics, uptime, error rates, latency, response rate per second, all of that, uh,
yeah,
which you will always have to do even with AI systems. And I think even more critical with AI system, because sometimes the latency can spike because of the
yeah,
nature of the generation, right? So that is one aspect in terms of user experience. But the other aspect is also is the content that is generated, or is the output
mm,
that is generated in any format, whether it's image, video. Is it relevant? Is it does it use language fluently?
mm,
Does it meet the requirements of uh, whatever was like given as documents reference? Can you reference back maybe parts of the document and say, hey, this is what I've kind of generated, the brief,
yeah,
and these are all the points which have maybe reworded, but you can go and read the actual sources, right? So can it use
mm,
citations? So all of these have to matter. And then, so this is one problem, right? This is one of the customer side. Now let me talk about another problem where you have taken all of these, and then you want to now change your model, right? Now how do you kind of do evaluation? So now traditionally you can think of it as the closest analogy I can think of this is like you are refactoring a system, right? So you need to have like maybe test-driven development, or in our case, in the AI world, we
yeah,
call them evaluations. So how do you
yeah,
kind of build the evaluation? So not only are your whole workflow, engineering workflow is to be reconfigured, the teams
yes,
that manage the organization design has to be refactored in that. So it's not just taking this new and shiny thing and just putting a chatbot, but figuring out how your organization can respond to the challenges of the market. Uh,
yes,
which and the two types of inputs, right? One is obviously the customer needs and how they're changing, and second thing, the technology itself is changing so fast, right? We talked about that. And the
Yeah.
third part is how do you engineer all of this internally, both in terms of systems and in
Yes.
both terms of people, in terms of how you organize. For example, right, things that were maybe not necessary is like you might have to have a quality department that reviews regularly the output that is generated and builds that into a say evaluate after removing all the PI and identify builds that into a data set that can be used for evaluation. So when you're actually kind of replacing a model, maybe either from a different provider or a newer model in the same family of
Mm.
model, right? Uh, that output will change, but you should have be able to have some kind of a smoke test or a basic test saying that it does meet certain amount of standards, right? And
Yes.
again, there will be an article on this soon, but the example that I keep on giving people is uh, MMLU and all of these other benchmarks that you have. Those are like college degrees, right? You and me have degrees. Maybe if we did in computer science, it signals a certain level of competency, and the marks tell you know how much you did on the benchmarks. Benchmarks are useful, but when maybe I apply for a job or you apply for a job, the
Yeah.
technology is very nuanced. The use cases are nuanced. Retail industry is very different, say from healthcare is very different
Mm.
from fintech. So you'll have to go through additional evaluations, right? So that evaluation data sets kind of becomes important. So which is the team that does? Does it everything engineering? Is there a business analyst team that understands the domain really well?
Mm.
It is very much depend on what your organization is, what the application is, which means
Yeah.
again coming back to the same point, your organization design has to kind of reflect that. So I
Yes.
think that coming back to the main question that you asked, right? Technology is changing so fast, but why are organizations struggling is because they're grappling with these problems at multiple levels, at engineering level, at a use case level, in terms of meeting business outcome, but also how do you reconfigure teams and reconfiguring teams. Your organization structure takes time, right?
Yeah.
Technology, can be plug and play to some extent, and you can kind of replace that. But even with AI system, that is not easy. But doing that for organizations is much harder because it is important to contextualize for your applications, for your industry. And I think
Absolutely.
really fast. So yeah, it is. It can be very hard for anybody uh, who is not a domain expert and or like a AI expert. So you need uh, several people to work in conjunction to kind of make something like this successful.
No, absolutely. So, in a nutshell, what you said, right, and I completely agree with that, is that we have been dealing largely with deterministic systems, what we've built and what we've dealt with. Now we have these probabilistic systems, and the very methodology to build, to use, to maintain every aspect of that, just because of this small nuance, has changed. And what that requires is a whole restructuring within our organization, right? So it can't be seen just another IT initiative. It is not, right? It requires a reboot of the entire organization. Now, given this point of view, Vinayak, right, and given you have led a large number of technical teams in your journey, uh, if you were to give some very concrete recommendation to CXOs, they because the decision making often happens there, right? They are the ones who have the budgets, who have the authorities. What are some of the 3 to 5 maybe very concrete points you would recommend to them in order to sail through these changes and challenges?
I think for CXOs, I would say like maybe focus very closely on the ROI. I know again I'm in the my job requires I do like maybe shiny demos because shiny demos are important to show that what a technology can do. But as a CXO, if I were to put that on and I have played that role earlier in different organizations, I had to figure out okay, this is shiny demo. This is so the technology is interesting. This is a particular problem that it can be applied to. And how to kind of integrate the two. So being focused on ROI is like super important. The second part is like, how do you build guardrails based on
Mm.
the risk of your application, right? So what is like my AI ethics or risk? I would say responsible AI strategy there, right?
Mm.
That becomes like really important. What are the guardrails? What are the human in the loop? What are the redressal systems that I built? I think that is something that needs to be kind of thought about.
Mm.
There's obviously, so this is one, like from business point of view, I think I would say ROI, organization design would be the important focus. From a systems point of view, I think ethics and guardrails would
Mm.
be another, and responsible AI would be another consideration. And from a technology point of view, architecture, data strategy, because data can often be stuck in silos, right? So how do you pull this data from different data stores, right? A recent example, I was, talking to a customer very recently, and they had built chatbots for, their different departments, and they took very radically different approaches. One customer, and these are like very well known names. One of
Yep.
them used chatbot for every single. They built a chatbot for every single department, and I was like, that is like too much maintenance work, right?
Yeah.
You can possibly kind of consolidate. The other one went like horizontal, said we have one chatbot for everybody, and both these strategies were not working for completely different reasons, right? The one that built like specific chatbots did not get the benefit of overlaps between say different departments. For example, let's say if somebody is joining the organization, right, HR and finance will both get involved among And
Yeah.
then maybe also the team. For example, if it's engineering, then engineering will also be involved, right? So if there is some document that needs to be included in the chatbot, how do you manage
Mm,
with so many chatbot that are again uh,
mm,
specific? So the idea for them is to have better segmentation of data stores, better metadata filtering, better
mm,
tagging in the backend. So then I can build better context. Like for example, if I'm an engineer in AI applications, then I should be able to only see the documents that I have access to. Whereas a
yeah,
CXO in like or a CFO, let's say be more even more specific. Let's say CFO in
yeah,
finance should have access to all of the financial documents, whether it's HR, whether it's finance, whether it is procurement. It cannot be
mm,
siloed, right? So how do you build this kind of governance solution is kind of important. Whereas the
mm,
one who has become very like horizontal, that CXO was struggling with relevance because the system was in some sense dumbed down because there was so much highly sensitive stuff
mm,
that the relevancy suffered, right? So
yeah,
while they had connections to everything, they were not giving enough context about, say, who is this person, where does the person stand, or what is their role, what do they have access to,
yeah.
uh, so on and so forth. So again, like uh, these are some of the things. And again, coming back to the framework that I use, organization design, ROI, data strategy, ethics. The architecture that you build actually depends on so many different factors, which is why it is so hard to maybe sometimes justify the effort that is done. But the organizations that
Mm,
have done that successfully and deconfigured them have got tremendous benefits. So there is, I would posit that there is necessary effort that needs to be put in to get those benefits. So it won't be like a magic wand where I can sprinkle some AI, sprinkle some RAG somewhere, use the latest model and it will work. No,
yeah.
it doesn't like that. You have to put in the effort.
No, no, great point. Great point. So I think what you're saying is it's not just the engineering part, right? How do you build the AI system? But it's about understanding the problem end to end. What are you building? For whom are you building? Right? How should I kind of position in terms of horizontal, vertical, or somewhere in between? So these all aspects together kind of come together and create the success. And that is where the ROI will start to see. It
Absolutely.
is not just because you have used the most jazziest AI algorithm that just came last night that will
Yeah.
kind of lead you to that magic thing, right? That's what.
Yeah, and it's basically,
Fantastic.
I think for startup, just to add to that, for startup, I've been having this concept with some of the startup CXOs also, and both early stage and mid stage, that have got some traction. And I've been telling them that uh, while there is some fun in talking about the latest and greatest, I think the things that will get them money and traction are the ones which are like boring stuff that people don't want to do. I'll give you a couple of examples, right? Uh, let's say I'm a marketer. I know my audience. I know my medium. So audience, I mean, could be like developers, let's say, or like
Okay.
business people.
Yeah.
Medium could be like LinkedIn or say Twitter or any of the, maybe it could be emails also. I know
Sure.
the medium really well. How do I kind of combine them in a way that kind of adds meaning while kind of having like maybe say an authentic voice, right? That is something that can be figured out. Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Uh, Maybe just changing gears, right? One of the aspects that I is about data, right? So two things, right? One, there is this whole issue that where AI seems to be going, we are running short of even the internet is kind of not enough as a data set, right? And people are, or in order to train better algorithms, we need more and more. But then, what's your take on the copyright side of it, right? Who owns the data? Uh, we know that there's a law, there's a specific law in the US courts whereby they say that if you are a search company, you are allowed to crawl all the data and use it. Now, that in a way is being used also to train the models, right? And a lot of these companies have become multi-billion dollar companies by using the data and training algorithms on it, right? Where do you stand on this? Like, who does the data belong to? Uh, what are the ethical aspects of it, and what does that lead to?
No, I think it's interesting, and I think I'll go back to the root of this, right? Like, let's say if I'm a painter, a creative person, I definitely go through school and look at the artistic styles of say Andy Warhol, Salvador Dali, for example, or Van Gogh, and so on and so forth. And initially, I would actually probably copy those so that I
Hmm,
get used to the style, the way that they represent stuff. Eventually, over a period of time, I kind of, as an artist, I'll probably develop my own authentic way of
hmm,
maybe representing stuff based on my own experience. So we never build stuff in isolation. Same thing with architecture, same thing with technology, right? So there is a case to be made in some sense, I would say, for fair use, right? Because unless like the AI system is completely um, copying it, like and pasting it, as it is, which is in contravention of, I would say, copyright law. To some extent, you can obviously, quote something, like we do, like for example, in book reviews or movie reviews, for example. But or even like parody is another good example where we kind of reuse maybe the tune
Yeah.
or the sentence structure or the context and then kind of rework it to a different sense. So those things are protected by copyright use. Again, I have to say that I'm not a lawyer, so this is my interpretation. So take it with like loads of salt.
Yeah.
But again, because coming back to the earlier point, right? Because it is probabilistic, yes, it has been trained on this stuff. But some of the stuff is like so that is generated so uncanny in terms of style, in terms of say writing
Mm.
style, or in terms of image styling. Uh, there will be a push from creators to maybe license maybe certain styles or use certain styles, and we'll
Mm.
have to figure out a way to get some provenance. But the challenge is because AI systems, especially going back to the technology, neural networks, attribution is like slightly difficult. It becomes slightly harder to kind of prove what are the sources where it has come from.
Mm.
Many times also, like for example, if you're asking me some of these questions and I have talked to maybe multiple customers, and maybe sometimes one customer might have said something and it's like, oh, I might have filed it away. Maybe I read it on this book, in this book, and then this customer also I was able to read. So I've taken two insights and kind of formulating that mind. Is that like copyrightable? Probably not. Right? So we all take inspiration, but this line is very fuzzy. There are instances where I've seen that the style is like very closely copied, and hence there is a question of harms that can be done. But again, it's a very research oriented topic. At the same time also, it has like a societal value to answer this question. So I don't have
Mm.
a very clear answer, but I feel that at some point where it will settle, is my opinion is that there will be some kind of compensation that will be made or some kind of licensing. So either it could be like a compensation based model, whereas I maybe build
Mm.
based on it, I'll maybe compensate you, who is the creator, for a maybe certain small license, or again maybe possibly say, I'm going to train my AI model, and for the training, for the data, I'm going to pay you something, but
Mm.
anything that gets generated, you don't get any incremental value, or a combination of these is likely to possibly happen. But again, thinking about it from a fair use point of view, again, there are for a large array of things. I think a lot of things will fall in like the fair use area, but where does the kind of meter lie on that scale? It's hard to detect. It's a research problem. It's also an engineering problem to kind of do attributions.
Correct.
And attributions are necessary not only for this, but even in high risk sectors. Right? For example, if a system is generating a certain recommendation, we need to figure out how to do
Yeah.
citations, for example. That is not all, and we know that that is not always possible. If you
Correct.
use like a math system, to some extent, that is possible.
Mm.
It's a system problem. It is a societal problem. It is a legal theory that needs to be figured out. So all of these three have to work in conjunction.
Mm.
Typically, I think maybe somebody might take a maybe first stab at it, and then things will evolve from that on. But it's
Yeah.
hard to say if this will kind of land.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another point, important topic to be discussed is this productivity of humans, right? Especially when AI kind of deep learning and all of that started and ChatGPT came, hunch was, hey, it's going to impact more the bottom of the pyramid, the blue collar job. But now it seems to be the case that rather than having more impact there, it might actually impact a lot of white collar jobs, right? Programmers being one of them. A specific question, Vinayak, I mean, we've already seen demos where these systems can take repos, can take Jira tickets, create the patches, push in those patches, do a lot of this stuff automatically. But we all know these are not 100% perfect systems, right? And you need a human intervention, you need human checks and balances. How are we going to deal with scenarios whereby a lot of base code might be written by by machines? Human might only come and do fill in the blanks on top of it. But more importantly, to review, you need highly specialized uh, programmers slash coders. I mean, we might get to a scenario where testing slash reviewing might be a more critical job than actually writing the code, right?
Absolutely. The nature of the job will change for sure.
Yes.
Again, like what is so in some sense special about say LLMs and the models, that is that it is targeting human cognition, right? Which was not the. I mean, to some extent, I think they were always there. For example, computer vision models, and also it's not that all of it is new, but it has become much easier, right? Let me just put it that way to do this. So I think curation will become important. Also, I think let's say for example code generation. Like, there's this huge movement about vibe coding, right? So today, like for example, a product manager who can articulate what needs to be built can work with the AI to build like a product spec, and then use that product spec to kind of build a MVP. So MVP has become easy, right? And I might maybe do like vibe coding and all. But the question I've been asking everybody is like, okay, you vibe coded something. Now, how are you going to vibe refactor? Is that easy enough?
Mm.
I found it like it little tricky. I mean, there are so many nuances where it requires expertise. So yes, again, like like I said earlier, like if you're struggling with language and it increases the base to some extent. So now you're so somebody who's at a say on a scale to 0 to 100 in terms of English, if you English language competence, somebody who's at 80 would still be respected, right? Whereas somebody who is initially at 20 can now probably compete at a level which is like 40 or 50. So the
Yeah.
people who are between 40 to 50, sorry, 20 to 50 range will have to
Yeah.
definitely up their game to reach 80.
Yeah.
Because no matter how much AI generation we have, we will still need authors because
Yeah.
eventually whatever you express in language, it requires thought. Like for example, if you're writing a fantasy novel, you need to create that world. You need to think about what that world represents. You have to ask philosophical questions. It is not as easy as just doing a world. Yeah, the mechanical part of writing to some extent can be possibly outsourced, but the meta thinking, I don't think one can be replaced. So that is, I would say, one challenge. Um, so again, like if you use this tool, some of the mechanical parts of it will become easy, but
Mm.
you will have to use how to use a craft, right?
Yeah. Mm.
Just like you have got like a chainsaw now, but if you don't know how to use a chainsaw, and you cut the tree is going to fall on your head and kill you, right? So knowing how to cut, where to cut, like
Yeah.
using printing, using curation becomes important. And I would say
Yeah.
there are so many niches that will also become very important. Like for example, let's say code generation. If you're building, like say, let's say, I don't know, like an avionics system, right, in defense, which has, I don't know, maybe like uh, a lifetime of, I would say, like say 30 years, 20 to 30 years, or at least 20 years, if not say 30 years.
Mm.
It need to have a lot of kind of provenance, in testing. There
Mm.
has to be coding guidelines that need to be followed. There need to be certain asserts and data checks that need to be built. And
Mm.
possibly you're writing in a language where some of these models are not exposed to, right? Like if you're building like a web app, great. But can you build like an avionics system and
Mm.
compete with a 10-year maybe experienced engineer who's build a system? Probably not. Maybe we can get close by building custom models and all. But I
Mm.
think that is still harder, and that would still require. So it will become things will be because of the base effect. You'll have to become more and more specialized. For example, right?
Correct.
Uh, so I think the base effect will there. The other challenge is somebody who's new in the field, right? Typically, we do like apprenticeship and internship and this kind of figure and review a craft. So there is some small possibility that the people who are experienced will get a lot more benefit, whereas the people who are starting off new who do not know how to use the system might actually suffer. But somebody
Yeah.
who is smart and knows how to use the system can level up really fast.
Correct.
That so now you can't possibly coast around maybe in the 20 to say 60 range. You have to figure out if you're at a 20 range how to get to 60 and beyond, and
Yeah.
AI how to use AI to leverage that. So you're
Correct.
competing with somebody who knows how to use AI to go to that maybe 60 to 80 band and maybe 100 band as well,
Yeah.
uh, and kind of refine that craft. Any craft, it could be writing, it could be
Yes.
writing, uh, generating images, possibly. Uh, like for example, illustrators like who maybe designs a book covers will not go away because you have to read the book, you have to figure out how are you going to place the different elements, how does the color, what color combination that works. So these are all
Mm.
like maybe some extent meta things, but if you talk to many of these artists, they will say, hey, I use this AI generation tool, and I've talked to some of these artists, and they said, hey, we use it for ideation, but eventually, it's so much pain to actually edit and ask the AI, I can just draw faster. But
Yeah.
yeah, we use it as an ideation tool as well. So this is I think this is how we work with AI. That base effect will come into play, and we will not compete and become obsolete indirectly. I think will become obsolete by not making use of these tools. So you're competing against people who can use these tools and use these
Mm.
tools well, rather than just AI system that which are going to take over jobs, which is like a very very small minuscule part of uh, the overall structure. So parts of your job can maybe possibly automated, and there are parts that cannot. So
Yeah.
specialization will become more key. Competency will have to be higher for you to be able to ask for that particular delta.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, if you had one wish or wish list in terms of AI development, what aspect of AI would you want people to work on or get developed, right? Where the larger world can benefit more.
Yeah, I think I feel that AI can have a huge impact on simulations and testing. And I'll give real world examples of this protein folding, drug discovery, and people have shown that it can have huge impact there. Uh, Certain kinds of molecules that attack certain kind of diseases, or to model systems, biological systems in a way that can mimic and shortlist some
Mm.
of the promising experiments, and then eventually they will go through a clinical trial. So that process can be accelerated, I feel, to some extent. Similarly, I feel that the challenge that is actually facing us head on is climate change, right? So maybe climate modeling, if it becomes easier, at least aspects of it become easier for modeling in terms of prediction, in terms of figuring out the different dynamics. I think that would be like really useful. And anything related to climate change, for example, it could be even like, how do you increase the efficiency of say, EV engines? How do you figure out what chemicals to use, what chemistry to use, how to combine chemistry and mechanics together to be able to build better batteries. I think that would be like a AI can actually. I feel that if it can accelerate that scientific discovery, it would be useful, and it's already happening. And last not the least, but material science, which is kind of allied to this, can we build better materials, say that work, and maybe even monitors like variable computing might become more viable, possibly. Can have maybe like smart fabric. People are also talking in about building nanobots that can maybe uh, be ingested just like capsules, and then maybe give you like very very specific personalized dosages. I think so. These are the kinds of things that I'm looking forward to: drug discovery, climate modeling, material science, possibly like maybe nanobots and robotics, which would kind of help us in things that maybe is not the best use of say human endeavor. For example, cleaning sanitary systems, for example, could be something that could be done by like robots and robotics. Uh, um, um, if there's a fire, can robots go in and be first responders and figure out, through maybe thermal and different kinds of sensors and what the situation is, so that things can become much more safer for firefighters. So those kind of the things I'm like, looking for the combination of robotics and AI, combination of AI and other fields where because I think innovation will happen at the intersection really, really, really well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, I mean, today you have to be sitting under a stone to be not knowing about AI, right? But a lot of people don't know where to begin. If you were to suggest some books, Vinayak, right, and these need not be deep technical books. These could be non-technical as well, right? What are some of the books you would recommend so that people will start to get into this world? Because not knowing about it is not an option anymore. I mean, that is very clear to all of us.
Yeah, so I will recommend two things. One is I think Microsoft and my colleagues and I have developed some material called Beginner's Guide to AI. If you Google for that and GitHub, you should be able to find the links to that. And maybe this I can provide you the links so that you can probably link it in the podcast as well.
Yeah,
Then
absolutely.
recently there's a AI agents for beginners tutorial that has given. So these are why it says for beginners. I think even like people of like you and me who want to go into very specific topics like say vector databases, for example, right, and know more about the different maybe types, the embeddings, all of that. There's always new things that can be learned, so it is kind of constantly updated. And I think there are 21 chapters in the beginner's guide to generative AI, and then there are similar kind of chapters in the um, guide to AI agents as well. In terms of the books, I feel that I would suggest again there are different aspects of AI, right? If you want to kind of figure out how did we get here, and possibly how did these breakthroughs happen, right? So for example, some of these things have been around for a while, and neural networks have been around for example, if you want to know how they evolved, what were the underlying breakthroughs in say in compute, in technology that led to this revolution. There's Fei Fei Li, who's written a book called The World's I See, which is uh, history plus memoir mix of neural networks, and she built one of the top databases like ImageNet, if you already probably know that. And the other book that I really liked was like The Genius Makers, that talks about this evolution of neural network from a technology point of view, from an implementation point of view.
Mm,
It's written by Cade Metz. It's called The Genius Makers. And in terms of how to use AI systems, right? Because we talked about CXOs and we talked about people who are new to AI or people who are building AI systems. I think Ethan Molik's, I follow him on Twitter, and he has fairly insightful analysis on Twitter as well. But he has written a very interesting book called Co-Intelligence about how AI can be used as an extension of your thought
mm,
process, extension of your brain. So I found that really useful. One of the things that maybe, for example, CXOs struggle with is knowing what is possible and what is not possible, right? Like, for example, when LLM models were new, they could solve and give exams really, really well for various different aspects, and you saw that in the benchmark. But if you ask it like a word problem, which say a 5 or 6 year old can solve really well, they fail miserably, right? So what you would expect, right, AI to solve very easily was actually very hard, and what would you expect AI to be hard was actually very easy. So he has this concept of a jagged edge, where something is out there and AI can solve it, so it's kind of falling within the boundary. Whereas something that is maybe fairly easy, like like a word problem, math problem, but harder for it is harder for AI to kind of solve it. So there is that jagged edge, and when you're building AI system, that can hurt you a lot because you can expect that it will behave a certain way, but you cannot completely predict its behavior. And we talked
Correct.
about this because it's a probability system. So it talks about all of these different things. So co-intelligence by Ethan Molek is probably another book that I found really good. And I think for use cases, I think AI Snake Oil is like magnificent because it covers such a diverse range of use cases and how AI is used and also abused, right? Because I think
Correct.
AI, we are in a very weird world where AI is simultaneously overhyped but
Correct.
also underutilized,
Correct.
which is a contradiction in terms, right? So I think AI Snake Oil kind of does traverse that use cases like very very beautifully.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely right. Maybe last question in the interest of time, right? In terms of the latest trends, right? We have these agents, right? What is your take on agents, multimodality? Where do you think the next year or two is going to be? And what can one expect?
So agents is, I would say it's a sort of a design pattern where you can have a AI system act on behalf of you. So the way it can do, for example, planning, understand your maybe preferences and execute on your behalf, I think that is really really powerful. There are certain patterns in which it can be used, but it's like fairly early, I would say, in the game to be able to execute. So as I said, how do you build guardrails? How do you improve better planning? How do you do, for example, re-ranking, of outcomes? So all of these are like open problems, but I think AI agents is something that will actually get adoption quite fast across industries and augment, I think, human action as well. At the same time, I feel that multimodality is very very game changing because uh, typically, like let's say when you go to a restaurant and taste a dish, uh, you are not only you're looking at it visually, which is like I
Yes.
think plating is important. So you're using your
Yeah.
vision,
Correct.
uh, then you're eating it, which is like your taste,
Yeah.
which is another sense. At the same time, you're also smelling it, right? So and many times also texture, right? Like for example, if it is like a crackle, right? Something is like really crunchy, and the texture gives so that touch. So you're using four senses, and typically how humans interpret the world is through a multimodal way.
Yeah.
Again, it's a very early days in the age of multimodality, but can we build systems that can change how we work and integrate with computers, right? That would be very very interesting. So maybe in some sense we are kind of we might become cyborgs, but I think multimodality is probably at the beginning of it,
Hmm.
in terms of retrieval, in terms of interpretation. Because even if you look at our data, it is in PDF files, it is in charts, it is in JSON formats, it's in the database, it is in 3D models. How do you kind of integrate, all of these to kind of make sense of the world? So multimodality, both in terms of interaction and in terms of interpretation of data, will become very, very important. And you're seeing some examples of this in the recent past that some of the systems have become better and better. So both agents and I think multimodality I would say, will be the next large trends that will kind of, in some sense, ride the market, I feel.
Got it. Got it. Got it. I would have loved to continue this, Vinayak. I mean, this is such a fascinating interaction. But in the interest of time, we'll have to stop. Thank you so, so much. You bring a wealth of experience both across depth and breadth. And it was such fascinating to know your thoughts, your insights. Thank you so much for this. And I really look forward to many more conversations like this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anuj. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for having me on this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Cool.